The European Union is adopting powerful tools to control big tech, and the UK isn't far behind. I've published a separate video on the US Department of Justice case against Google's dominance from its search engine. The US doesn't have the equivalent of the new EU rules. The current big cases that the DOJ has against Google are more of a traditional backward-looking process. The UK innovated in the Microsoft Activision merger investigation by at least initially blocking the merger on the grounds of the impact on cloud gaming. This was very much a forward-looking analysis. There's a balance here to be struck between more nimble, innovative regulation of big tech and overstretching economic theory in a way that hinders a dynamic and changing industry. One of the key features of the new EU Digital Markets Act is the identification of digital services, where particular companies are designated as gatekeepers. These are the 6 companies that have been identified as gatekeepers. It's interesting to know that there are no European companies in the list. They're all American, except for ByteDance, the Chinese owner of TikTok. There are 22 digital services that are on the gatekeepers list. So you can see, for example, that Apple is in the list for its App Store, Safari, and iOS, its mobile phone operating system. Microsoft for its Windows PC operating system and LinkedIn. Google has the most categories where it's identified as a gatekeeper. The list will evolve. The European Commission is still considering whether other services should be added. For example, Apple's iMessage and Microsoft's Bing search are still being reviewed. For the particular service identified, gatekeepers will have a list of obligations that they must meet. It includes do's and don'ts. For example, they must share data with rivals. They must also make services interoperable with competitors. In addition, they must keep the Commission informed if they intend to buy a rival. In terms of don'ts, gatekeeper platforms should no longer treat services offered by themselves more favourably in ranking compared to the ranking of third-party services on their platform. Also, gatekeepers shouldn't prevent users from uninstalling pre-installed software. The Commission will be empowered to adopt remedies if they find any abuses of power, including hefty fines of up to 10% of turnover. It's still not 100% clear to me how some of these rules will work in practice. For example, in principle, interoperability could mean that WhatsApp would be obliged to make it possible for new messaging apps to access WhatsApp messages through their new app. This is seen as important for making it easier for users to switch and try out new services. The UK is also developing similar rules in the Digital Markets, Competition and Consumers Bill that's currently going through the UK Parliament. This will result in the identification of designated undertakings that have strategic market status. Like the new EU rules, these undertakings will face conduct requirements in terms of how they treat consumers and other businesses. The UK Competition and Markets Authority will be able to intervene to require designated undertakings to share information that might help competitors to enter the market. These new initiatives in the EU and UK have a fairly strong political momentum behind them. I think that there is a general feeling in Europe that the US has been too lax on its big tech companies, although it is the case that the Biden administration has seen a shift in the attitude of government towards big tech monopoly power. This is why the US case against the Google search engine is so interesting, because it will indicate whether the change in administration tone towards big tech will feed through into the courts, which will ultimately make the decisions on these issues. There's also increasing public distrust of big tech in terms of the data it's collecting. The data is the bread and butter of big tech's business. Some have called it the new oil. It's that big in terms of having massive value. That said, From an economic perspective, big tech is not necessarily a bad thing. There are positive network effects associated with big tech suppliers. Network effects are the increase in value of a product to users when the number of people who use that product increases. However, where a company has market power, if that power is abused, this distorts competition unfairly, which has a negative impact on the broader economy. The US has raised concerns with the EU over the Digital Markets Act from the perspective that it's mainly targeting US companies. Plus, some in the US are claiming that the new EU rules will result in regulatory overreach and that this will stifle innovation. There's no easy answers here. I think that setting up a system of identifying potentially problem areas in advance is highly desirable. This allows for regular communication between regulators and big tech, such that potential problems can be identified in advance. The fact that regulators have powers to intervene hopefully means that the big tech companies can amend their behaviour quickly to minimise the risk that their power will negatively impact on competition. Hopefully it won't result in regulatory overreach, because I do think that there is an element of natural evolution of big tech. When you see how Facebook has dramatically fallen out of popularity amongst young people, no individual big tech service can be complacent. To some extent, the market itself does regulate the big tech companies. I think that the backward-looking US system with its high legal thresholds perhaps isn't enough. As long as the EU and UK can avoid overreach, this may be the perfect system for checking excessive power being exercised by big tech, but allowing them to flourish and innovate towards new services. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you considered liking and subscribing. Thanks for watching. See you next time.